Chapter 3 of Roosevelt's Communist Manifesto by Emmanuel M. Jovison. Roosevelt's Illuminist Communist New Deal Program. Roosevelt proclaimed his adherence to Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati in the very title of his book. And though Weishaupt ordered that all arts, sciences, and religions should be abolished, he undertook to replace them by the socialist science of government, propounded by himself and pronounced by him to be the only true science. Weishaupt also dictated that it must be founded on natural law, which he alleged is the only true law. Plagiarist Roosevelt followed suit and wrote the science of government founded on natural law. Weishaupt ruled that the superiors of the order of Illuminati are to be regarded as the most perfect and enlightened of men. They must not even permit any doubts of their infallibility. Roosevelt starts his Science of Government with a preface that is a testy dissertation on his superior wisdom and infallibility that he orders shall not be questioned, and he demands that the whole world acquiesce in it. He scorns any pretense of modesty in his self-praise. He condemns his critics in advance for their ignorance and stupidity in failing to recognize his omniscience, and he demands that praise shall be heaped upon him from all corners of the world. His attitude is the familiar "Papa knows best" attitude that is so characteristic of the Roosevelt-Delano dynasty and their fellow conspirators. Copying Weishaupt, Roosevelt next proceeds to divide to rule by inciting class warfare, the most demoralizing form of civil war. He acknowledges the control and manipulation of money is the root of all the evils which he decrises. But instead of attacking this root, which is the very device that he and his fellow illuminists plan to use for the enslavement of mankind, he vaguely and fleetingly suggests kicking the moneylenders, who happen to be he and his kingsmen, out of the temple. He commiserates with the producer, the forgotten man. He professes that he feels so sorry for laborers that he wishes to regiment them and enslave them on an international basis. The power thus gained, he plans to use to wage war on the workers, fellow victims of the dishonest monetary system, on their employers. He thus plans to usurp their property, regiment them under his dictation, and distribute their wealth in the directions of himself and his fellow conspirators. He plans to emasculate and destroy the Constitution, which he likens to a sinking ship, to make way for a dictatorship of his own devising. This dictatorship and the slavery that it entails, he labels a new social order. Roosevelt's dictatorship program is identical with the organization program described by Weishaupt for the carrying out of his Illuminist conspiracy for world control. Labor organization, the control, regimentation, and subversion of the masses was conceived by Weishaupt as a means of obtaining power over the state as well as a device for financing his conspiracy. And virtually all labor organization since then has continued in control of their conspirators. Vicious exploiters of labor who pose as labor leaders, the conspirators systematically take advantage of such errors of high employment and prosperity as their conspiracy permits, to loot the workers by due and assessments on the pretense that they have provided the higher wages that prosperity and a high level of employment have brought about, in spite of their malign devices activities. As a result, organized labor has been a captive of the subversive conspirators for more than a century. In their pose of friends of laborers and labor leaders, they have cunningly used labor as their prime weapon in the war which they wage on the community, year in and year out, to enslave it together with labor. In the science of government, Roosevelt blueprints the regimentation of every phase of the community life in the pattern that has become so familiar to us. In the so-called New Deal of the Kingsman, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, and his fellow conspirators followed the blueprint of his Kingsman so closely that the organization of the New Deal's NRA can be recognized clearly in the diagram published by Clinton in The Science of Government Founded on Natural Law. But present-day Roosevelts pretended they have no knowledge of their cousin Clinton or this book. Clinton Roosevelt's Foco Loco activities spelled the conversion of the Democratic Party to the support of the Illuminist Socialistic Communist conspiracy. Bipartisanship resulted in the contamination of the opposition with the same affection. This has resulted in making Illuminist, socialist, communist doctrines and policy an integral part of the American political thought and life. Thus, it is fully and understandable that the Kremlin has always trusted the Roosevelts. It was quite meaty that the USSR was prepared to honor the American dynasty that did so much to make possible its rise, in the person of Eleanor Roosevelt. They offered to send an official plane to meet her at Helsinki when she announced her intent to visit the Soviets in July 1954. This trip was part of a plan to align the subversive communist vote behind the candidacy of her two sons, Kiss and Telly Jimmy, and Love Them Sock and Leave Them Franklin, who were prepared to execute a pincer movement on the nation from two continents separated, communist infested sections of the country, in the furtherance of the Illuminist inspired conspiracy. Queen Eleanor spared herself in agony of sojourn in the conspirators' Soviet paradise by making demands on her prospective host with which they could not comply. But it would be quite fitting that the Soviets bury her in the Kremlin in recognition of the role that she and her ancestors played in making possible the rise of communism and the USSR. It would make many folks on this side of the Atlantic happy. It was quite in keeping with the character of the Roosevelts that Eleanor Roosevelt denied, in a letter to me, any knowledge of her distinguished kinsman Clinton Roosevelt, the author of the New Deal aspects of the conspiracy that was faithfully carried out by cousin Franklin D. How well the Roosevelts are aware of the progress of the conspiracy is evidenced by the prediction made by, or with the acquiescence of, Theodore Roosevelt in the late 1890s. That is cited by Owen Winster in his Roosevelt, The Story of a Friendship, Macmillan Co., 1930, page 51, as follows. How long do you give the government at Washington to last? I asked Theodore Roosevelt and Cabot Lodge as we sat lunching. Those two students and writers and makers of history, well versed in the causes which have led to the downfall of empires, kingdoms, and republics that have had their day and gone into the night, were both silent for a moment. Then one of them said, "About 50 years." Which of the two set this limit? I do not recall. I came only that the other did not contradict him. Clinton Roosevelt, son of Herbert Cornelius Roosevelt and Margaret R., was born October 3rd, 1804, and he died a bachelor at the ripe old age of 93 on August 1st, 1898. His entire life was dedicated to the furthering of the Illuminist, socialist, communist dictatorship conspiracy, the new social order that now parades as the New Deal. The persistence of his political activity and of the propagandist zeal is attested to by a long series of pamphlets, of which a number can be found in the main New York City Library, which catalogs the following. 1. The mode of protecting domestic industry by operating on the currency, 1833. 2. The mode of protecting domestic industry consistent with the desires of the South and the North by operating on the currency, 1833. 3. On the paradox of political economy in the coexistence of expensive production and expensive population. 4. The science of government founded on natural law, 1841. 5. Opinion on the rights of conscience and property in Trinity Church, the King's Farm and Garden, and Domini Bogardus Bowery, and also in the rights in collegiate Reformed Dutch Church to trust estates of Steenwig, harping by Lex pseudonym, copyright by Clinton Roosevelt, 1865. 6. Collection of works by Clinton Roosevelt, 1889. In the Library of Congress are the following additional items. 7. Propositions of a new system of political economy. 8. Charges and arguments against Thomas Ebank, Commissioner of Patents. And that concludes Chapter 3 of Roosevelt's Communist Manifesto. If you have enjoyed this audiobook and want to see more like it, well, make sure to subscribe to not miss next week's chapter, The Illuminist Socialistic Communistic Dictatorship Conspiracy in America Today.